father stands in a field, watching his youngest son count sheep under a burning sun. He does not call for that son. Not yet, not even when a stranger from the capital arrives at his door, asking for all of his sons to be brought before him. 7 of his sons walk into the house that day, tall, strong, the kind of men a nation would be proud to call king. And one by one, the stranger looks at them, and one by one, God says no. No one in that room understands why, not the father, not the brothers, not even the prophet holding the horn of oil, waiting for God to point. And the boy who will actually become king of Israel is not even in the room. He is outside, alone, smelling like sheep, forgotten by almost everyone who matters. Why would God do this? Why skip over 7 grown men, each one seemingly more qualified, and choose the boy nobody thought to invite? The answer to that question is not really about David. It is about how God sees people. And it is about something every single one of us has wondered about ourselves at some point. Are we seen? Are we enough? Does what the world overlooks in us actually matter to God? To understand what happened in that house in Bethlehem, we have to go back a little further, to a king who was already failing and a nation that was already afraid. Israel's first king, Saul, had once been exactly what everyone wanted. Tall, impressive, a man who looked like a king should look. The people had begged for a king like the other nations had, and God had given them exactly that. But looking like a king and having the heart of one turned out to be very different things. Saul had disobeyed God, not once, but repeatedly. He had offered sacrifices he had no right to offer. He had spared what God told him to destroy. And slowly, quietly, something had shifted in heaven. God was not simply angry, God was grieved. The text says his heart was troubled over having made Saul king at all. So God sends the prophet Samuel on a mission that terrifies him. Go to Bethlehem, God says. I have chosen a king for myself among the sons of Jesse. Samuel is afraid. If Saul hears that another king is being anointed while he still sits on the throne, it could mean death for everyone involved. But God tells him how to disguise the visit, and Samuel obeys, walking the dusty road toward a small town that history had mostly forgotten. Bethlehem was not a place of power. It had no palace, no fortress, no army. It was farmland, and shepherds and quiet lives lived far from the politics of Israel's capital. And yet this was exactly where God chose to begin rewriting the future of a nation. When Samuel arrives, the elders of the town tremble. A prophet showing up unannounced usually meant judgment was coming. Samuel calms them and asks for Jesse and his sons to be consecrated for a sacrifice. Jesse brings his sons before Samuel, and this is where the story becomes almost uncomfortable to watch. Eliab, the oldest, steps forward first. He is striking, commanding. Samuel looks at him and thinks, surely this is the one God has chosen. But God stops him. Do not look at his appearance or his height, God says, because I have rejected him. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. One by one, 6 more sons pass in front of Samuel. 6 more times, God says no. Imagine the tension building in that room. Jesse must be confused, maybe embarrassed. Samuel, a man of God, standing in his home, rejecting son after son. What is happening? What does God want? Finally, Samuel has to ask the question that reveals something painful. Are all your sons here? And Jesse answers almost as an afterthought. There is still the youngest. He is out with the sheep. Notice what is not said. Jesse does not say, and he is remarkable. Wait until you meet him. He simply mentions him, almost apologetically, as if David were not really worth considering. In a culture that prized birth order, strength, and status, the youngest son tending animals in a field was not a candidate for greatness. He was the one left behind while the important business happened without him. But Samuel says, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. So someone runs out to the fields, and David is brought in. And the text pauses here, almost lovingly, to describe him. He was glowing with health, with beautiful eyes and a fine appearance. And this time, God speaks differently. Rise and anoint him, God says. This is the one. In front of his father, in front of the brothers who never expected this, oil is poured over David's head, and from that day, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. No trumpet sounded outside, no crowds gathered. Saul was still king. David went back to the sheep the very next day, as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. This is where most retellings of the story stop, satisfied with the twist, the surprise ending. But the real question is still sitting there unanswered. Why David? What did God actually see that everyone else missed? Scripture gives us the clue directly. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. But what does that actually mean when we look at David's life? Years later, David himself gives us a window into what those quiet days as a shepherd had shaped in him. Long before he faced Goliath, David had already faced lions and bears alone in the wilderness, defending his father's sheep with nothing but his hands and his faith. Nobody applauded him for it. Nobody wrote it down. He did it because it needed to be done, and because he trusted that God was with him even when no one was watching. That is the difference between David and his brothers. It was not that David had no flaws. He would prove, painfully, later in life, that he was capable of pride, of lust, of terrible decisions. David was not chosen because he was perfect. He was chosen because his heart, even in obscurity, even doing work nobody valued, stayed oriented toward God. His brothers were not necessarily wicked men. But there is a telling moment that comes later, when David finally arrives at the battlefield, where Israel's army is paralyzed with fear before Goliath. Eliab, the same brother Samuel had once assumed was destined to be king, sees David asking questions about the giant, and instead of curiosity or courage, Eliab responds with contempt. He accuses David of arrogance, of abandoning the sheep just to watch a battle. It is a small moment, but it tells us everything. Eliab, given every natural advantage, responds to a crisis with anger and suspicion. David, given none of those advantages, responds to the very same crisis with faith. Where have I not seen this same defiant, unimpressed challenge before? David seems to ask, remembering the lion and the bear. This was the heart God had seen years earlier in that field. Not a heart without struggle, but a heart that instinctively turned toward God, rather than away from him, especially when nobody else was looking. And this is where the story stops being ancient history and starts becoming something closer to a mirror. Most of us will never stand in a room where a prophet anoints us for greatness. Most of us live far more like David in the field than David in the palace. Overlooked, doing quiet work nobody notices, wondering if we matter, if we are seen, if anything we do in private actually counts for something. The story of Samuel walking past 6 impressive sons to anoint the one nobody thought to call is not really about kingship. It is a reminder that God has never measured people the way people measure each other. Height, title, birth order, reputation, the loud confidence of a room. None of it moved God. What moved him was a heart shaped in secret, tested by lions no one saw, and kept faithful in obscurity, long before anyone offered a crown. David did not become a man after God's own heart the moment the oil touched his head. He became that man in the years before, in the field, when being faithful cost him nothing but his time and earned him no one's applause. So maybe the real question this story leaves us with is not why God chose David. Maybe it is this: what is God seeing in you, right now, in the parts of your life no one else is watching?